Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to talk about generators in Python. Generators let you declare functions in a way so that they behave like iterators, where instead of receiving a single return value, you can actually receive an iterator that can generate multiple values with just one call of the function. This is incredibly useful for when we need to return a large set of values but we don't want to store them all in memory at once, especially before they can be returned from the function. Generator functions are basically defined like normal functions, but instead of returning data, they actually yield data, which means that we need to use the keyword yield instead of return. Unlike the return statement, which terminates the execution of a function entirely, the yield statement simply pauses the execution. This allows us to handle the data that was just yielded from the function before moving on to the next iteration of the generator. Aside from that, a yield statement can be used the same way as a return statement. You can have multiple yield statements in one function, and you can yield multiple pieces of data at once. It's also important to note that if there is at least one yield statement in a function, then no matter what, that function will be treated as a generator function. And even if that function is being used as a generator, we can still use a return statement. However, a return will function a little differently than when it is used in a normal function, which I'll explain in one of the examples of this video. Now let's dive into some code, starting with this basic example here. So for this first example, I have a list variable called pilots. It contains a list of dictionary values. I kept the information inside of it very simple. We just got a pilot and a ship type. Nothing crazy. Pilots are just pilots 1 through 12, and we've got one of 4 ship types for each one: frigate, cargo, cruiser, and capital. And then down here, we've got our function, which is going to be the generator. And then below that, we've got our for loop that's going to iterate through the generator and print out the information it gets from the generator. And I'm going to walk through this part of the example backwards. I'm going to start with the for loop. We've got an x variable that we're using to iterate through the iterator that we get from get cargo, where we pass in the list of pilots, and then we print out x each time we iterate. And what's being put into x is the entry inside the list that matches the criteria here, where we are looking for the ship type that's equal to cargo. So in this generator, we are iterating through the list we passed in with p, and we're checking to see if the ship type NP is equal to cargo. And if it is, then we yield P, which results in it getting put into X, and then we print out X. So when we yield, the function will pause just after this yield statement. It will pause right here, come back down here, P that was yielded will be put into X, and then we print out X. And then if there's anything else under this for loop, it would also get executed all the way until we return to the top here to get to the next iteration. And once we start the next iteration, it will come back to here where we paused and then continue executing forward. So even if the yield is not the last thing that happens before we go to the next iteration in this for loop, it's going to pause right here. It will print out this message here, and then it'll go back to the top and then continue searching for more pilots that have a ship type of cargo. And it's going to print out 3 entries because I have 3 entries in the list above that have a ship type of cargo. So what we should see is first we get a printout of the entry itself, and then we'll get a printout message here saying after yielding P. And the reason I have this print statement here is to demonstrate that the function is pausing. It's to demonstrate how it pauses. It's going to pause here, print out the data first down here, and then it's going to come back here and then print out this message. So it's just to show you that it does pause and then continue. It doesn't exit the function entirely and then just start over. So when I run this, prints out the first data entry. Then we get the after yielding message that's inside the generator function. Then we print out the second entry, and then it prints out that message again. Then we got the third cargo ship entry, and then the third message. So that's a basic example of how you would program a generator and how it works. All right, in the next 2 examples, I'm going to show you how you can stop a generator early. One way to do it, of course, is to raise an exception when we come across an error. Just because it's a generator function now doesn't mean we can't still raise exceptions. We absolutely can, just like anywhere else. So for this example here, we've got the list of pilots like before, except that in one of these entries, we see that we have a ship type of blob, and that's going to be what triggers our error. Because it's for the most part doing the same thing down here. It's just basically looking for ship types of cargo and then yielding that entry when it finds it. However, before that, it's going to check to see if the ship type in the entry is one of these ships. So when it finds a ship that's not in this list of ship types, it's going to raise this exception saying invalid ship type and print out the name of the ship that it detected. And then down here, we've got our typical try except statement where we try to do the for loop and then we catch the exception and print out the message. So when it gets to pilot 7, where it sees the blob ship type, it will trigger this exception, say invalid ship type blob. And there you go. So that kills the generator a little bit early because an exception occurred. But not all situations where a generator must end early will be caused by an error. The way we can stop a generator function early is simply by calling an empty return. I mentioned this earlier that returns have a different functionality when you use them in generator functions, and this is pretty much it. Using a return function inside of a generator function will cause an exception to be raised. This exception is called stop iteration. Fortunately, we don't have to worry about catching this particular exception when we use a return statement in this manner because Python will handle that for us. So all we have to do is put a return statement in there and Python will catch the exception for us and then make the generator function end like normal. So as you can see here, it's basically the same example. Data with a bad ship type. We've got our if statement here checking for the ship type, but instead of a raise exception, we just print the error message and then we say return. And then down here, we don't have a try except or anything like that because we don't have to try to catch that stop iteration. So if I run this, and as you can see, it detects the first two ships, but then it finds the invalid ship, and then it prints out the error message, then hits the return statement. And for our last example, just like return statements, yield statements can yield multiple values at once. And they're pretty much handled the exact same way as a return statement with multiple values. You can either have multiple variables to contain them, or it can get stored into a single tuple. So in this example, we've got a list of numbers that we're going to go through and determine which ones are divisible by 2, divisible by 3, or divisible by neither. So in our for loop, we iterate through our generator function here, where we pass in the list. And in our generator function, it takes in a list and it will iterate through each number in the list. And we have 3 yield statements here. Each one's going to yield 2 values. And depending on which yield statement gets called depends on the number. If the number is divisible by 2, then we yield 2 followed by the number. If it's divisible by 3, we yield 3 followed by the number. If it's divisible by neither, then we yield 0 followed by the number. And so in our for loop down here, we have a single variable to iterate through our generator function. So it's going to end up being a tuple. So we check the first element of the tuple to see if it's 2, 3, or 0, but in this case it just says else. And depending on which one it is, we append the second element in the tuple to the appropriate list. So if it's 2, we append it to the by 2 list. If it's 3, it's the by 3 list. Otherwise, it will be appended to the neither list. And then down here, I just got the print statements down here that print out the original list and then print out the lists that were created from running this function here. So when I run this, so we got our divisible by 2 list, 2, 4, 20, 32, and 50. Divisible by 3, 3, 15, 33, and 45. Divisible by neither, we just got 1 and 5. So as you can see, just like return statements, we can absolutely pretty much do anything with the yield statements as well. And that's about it for generators in Python. So I hope you've enjoyed this video and found it helpful, and if you did, then please hit the like button and leave a comment below to let me know what you think. And if you want to see more, head on over to Wayfair Coding Academy channel to check out my other content. And while you're there, subscribe to the channel to stay up to date on new stuff as it comes out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.